Well, hey, and welcome to the Impactus Young Man's Podcast. My name is Jordan. I'm so stoked that you're here. We try and help young men become, grow, and live as disciples of Jesus and help them navigate what it means to be a young Christian man in today's cultural moment. I don't know about you, but at times in my life, I've really tried to grow in areas that just keep falling short in. For example, humility. You wake up or you read the scriptures and you go to church, you're like, I'm going to be more humble, or I'm going to be more self-controlled. I'm going to be more loving. And oftentimes I don't seem to grow in the ways that I want just by wanting it. Oftentimes it's as if I need something around me, maybe like a community, or I need a strategy, or I need a space where I can actively practice the things that the scriptures are telling me to do. This really came alive for me when I joined a jiu-jitsu gym back in 2017. I had watched some UFC on TV and I really appreciated martial arts. And so I thought, why not sign up for this gym that would maybe help me become more fit and maybe I could make a few friends. Well, little did I know what was about to happen. When I stepped inside the jiu-jitsu gym, it's as if it just helped me grow in my spiritual walk in ways I never could have imagined. And so on this podcast, I've been wanting to talk about jiu-jitsu for a long time, but really I'm not wanting to talk about just jiu-jitsu. I want to talk about what can happen when you're in the right space with true community, vulnerability, when you learn to be humble, and how if you, with friends, commit to growing together, right? Like iron sharpens iron, that you can truly transform your life. For me, I learned so much about God in a wrestling gym. I learned so much about what it means to have a vibrant Christian faith by actually being in a space that I never thought I would have found it. And so on this podcast, I hope to talk about how as young men, we can grow in the spiritual disciplines by observing some of the things that happen even outside of the church. And to do that, I have J.M. Smith coming on my podcast, and he hosts a YouTube channel that's called The Disciple Dojo. And today we talk about how we can learn from martial arts and the practice of doing these things together, going through hard things together as men that can help us grow spiritually. I hope it's unique for you. I hope it's encouraging to you. And I really believe you're not going to want to miss it. And so all that and so much more on today's podcast. Let's jump right in. So Jane, we'll jump in, man. Just tell me a little bit about, first of all, who you are, what it is you're doing, and kind of, a little bit about J.M. Smith and Disciple Dojo.
So I appreciate you having me on. And Disciple Dojo started as the name of my blog way back in early 2000s. I was the pastor of discipleship at my church. And so I was over all of the adult education, men's ministry, women's ministry, young adults, senior adults, just anything that wasn't like worship, kids, music, preaching every Sunday. That was sort of in my wheelhouse. And so staff all had blogs. So I just called my blog Disciple Dojo because I was a lifelong martial artist. Cool. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is what I've been focusing on since around 2007. But my final ministry project, like when I was finishing seminary, we had to do a ministry project, readiness for ministry, semester-long project. And so mine was looking at the concept of the samurai and the concept of Bushido and analyzing that in terms of discipleship. And where I landed was the code of Bushido, and of course, the one that's presented. There are always exceptions, and history is always not as neat as it's presented. But the popular idea of Bushido and the code of the samurai and all of this, it was the right ethic with the wrong master. In other words, pledging your life to die for a master is not wrong. It was just they were applying it to human masters. The idea of honor above all else is not wrong. It's just you're applying it to a human master. So that was sort of where I spent my last semester of seminary, was just looking at discipleship through the lens of the samurai, and whether in pop culture movies like The Last Samurai. I did a presentation at a men's retreat where I took clips from the movie The Last Samurai and was like, watch this through the lens of a convert becoming a disciple, becoming a committed follower of Jesus. and you're going to see some incredible parallels. So that was the kind of background that it all came from. And after I stepped down from that job back in 2009, my goal was to go pursue an Old Testament PhD, Hebrew Bible.
Cool.
That never panned out for a number of reasons, but God, it seems, had other plans, that I was not to be the one doing the scholarship myself and writing the commentaries and teaching the
Right.
seminary classes, but rather being a bridge between that world of academia and hungry lay people who want to know scripture and want to know it better. So Disciple Dojo is what I kept the name of. We became a 501c3 nonprofit, I think about 5 years ago, have a board of directors. During COVID, we shifted. I was teaching in-person Bible studies every week. We shifted that because of COVID to the YouTube channel. And that's kind of been where the bulk of what I do is over the past, since around 2020. As the teaching ministry of Disciple Dojo.
Right.
Our outreach ministry, we have two sort of outreaches of Disciple Dojo. One is every week I teach a program called Refugee Jitsu. It's a free jiu-jitsu class primarily for refugee and immigrant kids here in Charlotte. We've been doing that for about 8 years now. Had over 100 kids have come through the program, and some are, grown and buying their own houses and going to grad school and doing all this stuff now. And then the other outreach is started a year, maybe a year and a half ago. It's called the Grown Ups Table, and it is a ministry for single Christian adults. It's on Facebook. It's a Facebook group, but it's a connect. Cool. It's a place where unmarried Christians, whether they're dating, whether they're anything, it doesn't matter. Just unmarried adult Christians can connect and do stuff together, like in-person events. We've done retreats, we've done ski trips, we people have just connected all over the world. We have a couple of thousand members all around the country. So depends on what day you catch me, what hat I'm wearing. But that's just a snapshot. So yeah.
Wow, man. And you know what? There's so many things in there I have questions about. Maybe we need to do 2 or 3 more podcasts. But what I love is how you said you were the bridge builder between like the academia and lay people, or like people that attend church that have a desire to really learn. And sometimes I feel, Jam, I don't know if this has been your experience. I was a pastor for 7 years. And sometimes I feel like we almost like don't give our people enough credit for like what they're able to consume and wrestle with. And so we kind of sometimes, and men in particular, this podcast is for men. Sometimes we assume like the men just wants like this like simple devotional. We do a daily devotional at our here at Impactus. And anytime we do something that's a little bit more deep, the guys are saying, give us more of this meat, like give us more, like challenge us a little bit, make us think. Has that been your experience as you deal kind of with men? Like, hey, they can handle more than you think. Yeah.
100%. There's a reason why things like the History Channel were so popular in the cable TV days. I mean, everything's sort of moving to more online, but men have a desire to learn, and churches have consistently dumbed things down for men because they think men just want football games and cookouts and fishing trips. And it's just, it's frustrating that's why I'm going to be honest. I have rarely connected well with men's ministries. Not speaking against the concept, but personally, because they have been so stereotypically, culturally masculine that they have rarely presented the idea of like the warrior poet, like the Miyamoto Musashi, like the most famous swordsman ever, was also a calligraphy artist and wrote poetry. And the idea of a scholar has incredible appeal to men. Men will watch documentaries about things. It's just, it has to be stuff that's interesting. That's the key. And so with Disciple Dojo, most of my viewers, I think 75% of my viewers are men. And I do a channel where I review study Bibles and interview scholars and talk about scripture in detail. So men have a craving, and it's largely going unfilled by both churches and the evangelical complex.
It's true. And Jam, I'm thinking of like, look at the long form conversation that men are listening to. Like, who else, even if it's not stuff that we would necessarily recommend from the pulpit, let's just say, men are listening to long form content somewhere that are asking the hard questions. And so for us as a Christian ministry and for you as doing what you're doing, it's important that we're actually answering the questions that men are coming to look for. If not, you become irrelevant so quickly.
I mean, think about this. Who would have thought 10 years ago that somebody said, hey, the number one podcast in the world is going to be a dude that sits for 4 hours, 2 to 4 hours an episode, and just talks to other dudes, scientists, physicists, authors, historians, wacky, far out people, mainstream, like nobody would have ever thought that. Who would have thought that you're going to have a celebrity, you're going to have a Jordan Peterson, he's going to sell out theaters just talking about things like stoicism and responsibility and the biblical stories. These people are filling a vacuum that in previous generations, people like G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, they had filled that vacuum. But with if the church doesn't raise up people that are speaking in these circles, then culture will, and that's what we've seen happen.
It's so true. On my previous podcast, I talked a little bit about how, like, it's not whether or not, you're being discipled. Like, it's just a matter of what you're being discipled by. And so the call to us as men is to make sure that actually we're jumping into those spaces, right? And what I love about your ministry too, you had talked about, doing this program for refugees and even just the singles group. Like, wow, JM, I just love your ability, man, to jump in where there is a bit of a vacuum, because the church oftentimes focuses on married couples. And so I love your heart. I can see where you're trying to tap into those vacuums. And one of those is through your jiu-jitsu ministry. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. You're a black belt. How long did it take you to get your black belt in jiu-jitsu? And maybe just for our listeners that aren't familiar with jiu-jitsu and they just assume, I hear people say all the time, oh, Jordan, do you do UFC? I'm like, no, I don't do UFC. Okay. It's different. Tell people kind of what your black belt's in and jiu-jitsu in particular, because we're going to talk about Brazilian jiu-jitsu and the faith today. So go ahead.
I started training. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I started martial arts after watching The Karate Kid in the theater as a kid. I'm 45 years old, so I'm like, that is my demographic. I did karate. I did taekwondo. I devoured everything I could in high school on Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do and blending styles. But I never had any formal grappling training. All my training was stand-up striking. So when I was at the church. I was working at the church I worked at after seminary, and my pastor said, hey, we've got a young guy who's coming to visit the church, and he just opened up a martial arts school up the street. Go connect with him, take him out to lunch. And, because I was head of the young adult ministry. He was in his 20s.
Sure.
So we went out for lunch, and I had been looking. I had gotten really bored with the martial arts I had been doing. I was doing Tang Soo Do at the time just to have something to do. But there's only so many times you can keep doing a form or kicking drills before your mind checks out. And so I talked to this guy, Derek Richardson, and he had just opened up a school. He was he was training under Renzo Gracie out of New York. So he would fly up to New York and he would train there a couple of times a year. And he opened an academy that was a blended martial arts style. It's called Leadership Martial Arts. And all of the curriculum, it was an in-house curriculum. So whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, you start, and at every belt level, you learn a little bit of striking, a little bit of grappling, a little bit of wrestling, a little bit of kickboxing, just a little bit of everything. And then when you get your black belt in that style, then you choose your specialization. What do you want to focus on now? Striking, grappling, self-defense, kickboxing. Like you can it's like getting a high school diploma and then you go to college and major on something. So we connected, we got along great. We were close to the same age. I'm a couple of years older than him, but I had been looking for grappling training specifically. He was a judo black belt, training under Renzo Gracie in jiu-jitsu, had black belts in other styles. So I started training there, and that was 2000. I can't even remember if it was at the tail end of 2006 or 2007, but it was right around the time that the UFC had become mainstream after the Ultimate Fighter show in 2005 had sort of blown it up. So it was really in that like good old days of MMA. And it was great being able to train. Half of the students, it seemed like, ended up being people from my church, because I would just be like, hey guys, come to jiu-jitsu with me, or come train. We're doing MMA, come train. So as I got older, I got less interested in the striking, kickboxing, MMA. I was training to maybe do an amateur fight, an MMA fight, just to get the experience under my belt, so that if I ever wanted to coach somebody, I could be coaching from a position of like, hey, I've been in the cage, I've done this. But I had some health issues, some surgeries I had to have that derailed that. And by the time I had recovered, I was well into my 30s. And MMA is not something you start when you're in your 30s.
Yeah.
so, so I focused on jujitsu because jujitsu, unlike MMA, is something you can start in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and you can train at whatever level you need to. And
Mm.
jujitsu just grabbed me because it's a stereotype that in the jujitsu community that it's three-dimensional chess, but it really is. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
reason people compare jujitsu to chess. It's move, counter move, strategy, setup, opening gambit, in game, all of these chess concepts. Very much in jujitsu, you're just doing it against another person's body instead of pieces on a checkerboard. So that grabbed my interest and my passion, and that was 2000. Yeah, I started in 2007. It took me 12 years. I got my black belt. I think I've got my black belt 6 years ago, in
Wow.
2018, up in New York on a trip up to Henzo's. We would go once a year,
Oh,
go up there
cool.
and train, which was amazing. If your listeners, any that know jujitsu, I would get to go, me and my training partners and our instructor, and we would go train with John Danaher
Oh,
up
wow.
in the blue basement. So I've
Wow.
done, I don't know how many classes with John Danaher, Gordon Ryan, Gary
Cool.
Tonin, Hadra Gracie was there a couple of times. I've been in the locker room with GSP, Frankie Edgar. It's amazing. It's like walking into a pickup basketball game with the dream team,
Yeah.
and I'm just this
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody. But over the years, getting to be around those that high level of people. I mean, I've become good friends with Carl Pravik, Silver Fox, who would train up
Yep.
there, and he's become something of a mentor to me in jujitsu. And it's just it's been a long journey, but it's never gotten dull, repetitive, or boring. And that's what I
Yeah.
love about jujitsu. Most people, it takes them about 10 years. I mean, that's the average. Some
Yeah.
people do it way quicker. Some people do it way slower. So I was about 12. Um,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
yeah, that's
so good.
I'm happy to
JM,
answer any jujitsu questions anytime. So feel free.
yeah, and just for our listeners, I've got a ton of questions, but jujitsu in its unique nature is grappling first. It's really defensive first. I would describe it that way. It just, like you said, there's not very much striking, and those names that you dropped, Danaher, Grace, Henzo, and all those guys. That's like the dream team, and so it's just
Mm,
so cool to hear that you've had that experience. But that's not unique to you either, JM,
mm,
because right now it seems as though Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in particular is scratching an itch for men in particular
mm.
that there's something happening where it seems like everywhere you turn, people are doing jujitsu. And it's not like the new CrossFit. Maybe they're
Right.
similar in some ways, but it's not just like a new fad. Like people are committing their 10 years to these types of things. I think like Craig Rochelle just came out and said that he's training. Matt
Mm,
Chandler is training. Like there's a lot of notable people, celebrities are training, and the effects that they're saying it's happening on their lives
yeah.
is profound. Do you think about jujitsu that is doing something for men and masculinity in particular?
Well, you mentioned CrossFit, and I think that's a great comparison. I'm not anti CrossFit. I'm not anti exercise. I think we as a nation should absolutely be doing more exercise. And if somebody's getting into whether it's CrossFit or marathon, Ironman, whatever, I think it's great. Jiu-jitsu, though, you can start jujitsu at any level of physical
Yeah.
aptitude, physical handicap, and you can take it from there. Like one of my friends, he's part of the grown-ups table. I've had him up to teach my refugee class. Carlos Alvarez. He's a jujitsu black belt in Miami. He's 100% blind. He competes
Oh,
at IBJJF at the highest levels in the black belt division. He competes against the Meows. Just phenomenal, like top tier jujitsu. Can't see a thing. He has congenital glaucoma and lost his sight when he was a teenager.
wow.
Jiu-jitsu has given the ability to still compete and to teach and to pass on knowledge. You don't really get that in other self-focused fitness disciplines.
Yeah.
Some other sports, they do give you the competitive itch. So if you're a competitor and you want to best your time in a race, and you go, or you like the Spartan races and running in the mud and doing all that stuff, and you get a cool medal at the end, and there's camaraderie. Jiu-jitsu is like that with an added layer on top of mental stimulation, like problem
Yeah.
solving on the fly, unending technique. Like jiu-jitsu is a
Yeah.
never-ending jigsaw puzzle, and you will
Yeah.
only have a few pieces of it, and you really learn that once you become a black belt. Then you're like, oh, I really don't know anything at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so it provides that, and then I talk about this on the Disciple Dojo channel some, but the level of camaraderie and authenticity
Yeah.
that jiu-jitsu provides is, I don't know of anything else that comes close.
Yeah.
Whether it's another martial art, or, and when I say jiu-jitsu, let me qualify. I should say grappling martial arts,
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, sambo, even a good combat wrestling.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just I'm using jiu-jitsu shorthand for
Yeah.
any type of grappling. Judo,
Grappling. Yeah.
they do the same thing, but something where you're not taking kinetic damage, but you
Yeah.
are going full force. That's the beauty of, that's why it's called the gentle art, or judo, the gentle way, because you
Yeah.
can train full force against a resisting opponent, not somebody who's standing there
Yeah.
cooperating or holding pads,
Right. Pretending.
and you have to solve problems on the fly. That's something that appeals particularly, I mean, it appeals to men and women, but particularly to men, the desire to strive, to better yourself, to sharpen your blade, and being pressure tested
Yeah.
constantly, constant pressure
Yeah.
testing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that stuff appeals. I
So
mean, there's a
good.
reason, like jujitsu guys, my friend Tom DeBlas, he's very famous in jujitsu community. I've trained with him a number of times. Good, great guy. We just love the guy. He has a huge following among people, young men in particular, because they're seeing that uh, pressure testing, bettering yourself, all of the
Yeah.
stuff that these kind of influencers are pushing. He's like, hey, jujitsu is going to give you this if you stick with it.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it
that's
does.
long-winded
And it
answer,
does.
but
Yeah, it's good, man. And it's funny because my story in jiu-jitsu very quickly is, I've always, and I want to be careful not to speak a self-fulfilling prophecy over myself, but um, I've often quit everything I've started, right? And that was kind of my story growing up, like joined soccer, don't like soccer, or I started a new habit, couldn't start. And there was something about jiu-jitsu that just like clicked for me. When I
yeah.
got on the mats of jiu-jitsu, it's like it all began to make sense a little bit more clearly. And it's as if I needed to experience some unique parts of jujitsu to realize what was lacking in my faith. And so, for example, let's use humility for an example. I so badly wanted to be humble, but I wasn't willing to let down my pride a lot of times in my faith in those circles to
Mm-hmm.
actually be humbled. When I got to the jujitsu, you can't pretend. You cannot fake jujitsu. You go in and you get absolutely crushed. I was probably 200 pounds when I started,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting crushed by 135-pound females that were like
Yep.
17 years old, right?
Yep.
And so humility, it's like there was a part that I actually had to go through the fire to learn humility. And
Yeah.
so when I think about masculinity in jujitsu, I don't know about you, JM. There's like this like it is the furnace by which character development and dare I say some fruit of the spirit when you're following Jesus can really grow. And men want to grow. Men
Yeah.
don't want to sit on the end of their bed, I don't think, and just be they have this innate desire for ambition and growth. And so I don't know. Does that resonate with you at
Yeah.
all, JM?
100%. It's I tell people, so I mean, there's a reason so many of my people at my church ended up becoming students at Leadership Martial Arts,
Yeah.
was because, or putting their kids in, even if they didn't, was because they saw exactly that. There, this striving, this um, competition, not for competition's sake, but for betterment's sake. And there's a
Yeah.
very key difference between competing because you're competitive and competing because you're trying to better yourself. And those are two,
Yeah.
there's some overlap, but they're two different motivations. Jiu-jitsu, you talk about humbling. You can learn about humility from the Bible, and you may get put in situations where you're humbled spiritually, but you have to be looking out for the lesson that you're going to learn. Like if God's trying to teach you something, a lot of times
Yeah,
through
exactly.
everyday circumstances, you have to be spiritually attuned and aware. Jiu-jitsu is like for you don't have to be aware. You're going to get humbled. You're going to
Yeah.
get beat. You're going to get toyed with. You're going to have nights where you show up and you're, Henzo always said, sometimes you're the hammer and sometimes you're the nail. And
Yeah.
you're going to have many, many nights where you're the nail. So you don't have to be super spiritually attuned to learn those lessons in jiu-jitsu. You're just going to learn the lessons.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of parallel in like jiu-jitsu mats are like a microcosm of the world. On the
Yeah.
mats, you're going to have people who vote differently than you. You're going to have people who have a
Yeah.
different religion than you. You're going to have people who have different sexuality than you. You're going to have people
Yeah.
who are at a different stage of life than you. And that's like the world. So Christian, it's very easy to get off in a holy huddle and only hang around other Christians and only, like tailor our social media so we only see feeds from news outlets that we agree with or people that we agree with.
Right.
Jiu-jitsu is like, no, you go to class and you're going to be on the mats with who you're on the mats with. And it's up to
Yeah.
you to be a good training partner, to be
Yeah.
open, to make those relationships across those cultural, religious, ideological, political divides. Jiu-jitsu forces you to do that. And that's, to me, that's the beauty of it. It teaches Christians how to be better Christians. You
Yeah.
just have to see
100%.
what
Yeah.
you're learning in jiu-jitsu. Now look at the world through that lens, the
Yeah.
scriptural lens, and approach it
Yeah.
the way you approach jiu-jitsu. And you will be amazed at the difference that it makes in your own discipleship. And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing the other way. Some people, they see, I want to say this with correct nuance. I don't want to broad
Yeah.
brush, but
Go
some
ahead.
people see getting involved in jiu-jitsu, if they're Christians, as like, this is going to be my evangelism outlet. Like, I'm going to train, but my goal is to convert my coach, my teammates, my what. And it's not, I'm not going to tell somebody not to do that. If the Holy Spirit's leading you to, do it. But rather, I think a more productive approach is to say, jiu-jitsu is going to be my ministry field where I live out my faith and I make these connections and I build the relationships that then, if the topic of evangelism presents itself, I have the credibility as a person with these people, with my
Yeah.
teammates, to then be authentic about my faith.
Yeah.
Versus the canned approach of soul winners, got to get on the mats and got to turn
Yeah.
every lesson into a gospel parallel and all this stuff. It's, people can see through that. It's contrived, it's off-putting, and they don't trust a teammate that they think has an ulterior motive. Whereas somebody who's just there to better themselves and to learn jiu-jitsu, nobody cares what your faith is. If you're part of the journey, you're welcome. Let's do it.
So good. Yeah, it's funny. I'll share this story in vulnerability, but I was a pastor when I began training, and I remember I was grappling with a guy, and something happened. I don't think I got injured, but something happened, and a curse word just kind of came out of my mouth, right? Like I said something, and this person that has no faith background at all was like, "Oh, I've never heard a priest swear before," right? And I say that honestly because what happened was, in the next few months and weeks, relationship began to build where they realized that I wasn't this like high and mighty infallible dude. Like, I don't know, maybe some of my listeners have never accidentally swore, but but I imagine most of my listeners have,
Right.
And it was interesting in that moment. I began viewing these people as just like simply friends.
Yeah.
And I watched the gym and I thought every Christian needs to get into this environment. And just as an example, why I remember walking in with my gi on and I'm like, how do I tie my belt? No one's told me how to tie my belt, right? Okay, everybody's bowing do I bow at the instructor? Everybody's lining up. And I thought, this is what it feels like to come to a Christian church. Exactly. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then eventually the beauty of the community and the different beliefs sharing the same space. And it was like the most profound thing as a pastor I've ever been, because I'm like, this is what the church could be. Yeah. Now, some people might say, Jordan, you're making, you're making Christianity sound like a martial art, and this sounds really funky and weird. I'm simply trying to encourage our listeners today, JM, that there is a ton that we can learn from the jiu-jitsu community, grappling community in particular. And I actually think a grappling community tied with a strong faith in Jesus actually can give men exactly what they're looking for. And of course, you don't need a grappling community to grow into the likeness of Jesus and be discipled. I'm just saying it really helps. You mentioned the community aspect. in the craziness of 2020 and the racial divide that we were seeing, the one place that I never saw any of it was in the jiu-jitsu gym. Because you're grappling with people of every background, every socioeconomic space. You know, you'll be grappling with a doctor, and then the next moment you're grappling with someone that just lost their job. And it was this beautiful example of people striving for the same goal, but experiencing so many different things. And you, at the end of the game, you give everybody a hug. At the end of the night, you give everybody a hug. And the community piece, I feel like so many young men are looking for authentic community where they can come and be a novice. And not be embarrassed. And the question I would say is like,
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think
I was gonna say, the question is how can we as the church and as men and Christians make space for this type of community that can exist? Like, how do we bridge the divide there?
Well, think about what I was going to say is think about how church goes. Typically in most churches, you show up. Maybe if you have kids, you drop your kids off in the nursery or the children's church or whatever. You go into a worship center. If you're more traditional, you might still call it the sanctuary. And then you sit and you receive information. There may be some participatory stuff like the singing part, but depending on the church, it could be more of a concert than a participatory thing where you're watching, you're seeing stuff happening at you. Maybe you can participate in it, maybe you raise your hands and you sing. So there's a little bit. Then you're given a sermon, you're preached at, then you're challenged, and then it's over. And then you leave and go home.
You go home.
So in jiu-jitsu, not every class, because every jiu-jitsu academy is different, but most classes, you come, you warm up, you meet each other, you catch up for a little bit, chat a little bit, then you do some warm-ups, then you're presented the information. You're taught a technique, then you rep that technique slowly. You learn it, you take it in, you get a chance to feel it out. And then the next half of the class is you just train with each other. You free roll, you try to spar, you try to apply what you've learned in a practical setting. Now, I think the question that churches can ask is, how do we do that with what we're teaching? How do we make the lesson that you taught in the sermon? How do you give your people a chance to act that out before just sending them out in the world and say, now go do this? Like there needs to be some training together. There needs to be, whether it's, all right, coffee donut time after the service in the sanctuary, pastor's going to be there. We're going to talk about questions or time to connect or what, there's a million different ways you could go with that. But to me, it's the concept is, where is the participatory aspect in church that's not centered on what's happening on the stage? That's the question to ask.
No. Wow, man. And I mean, that's a whole conversation around how do we make space for that? I'm thinking like oftentimes some of the struggles I hear from young men is they say, I feel like I'm doing all the right things I'm told to do. And it's not necessarily building the life that I thought it was going to build, right? Like you're telling me to go talk to my neighbor about Jesus and you give me the 3 points and it's just not working, right? Or you told me to do this in my marriage and it's just not working, right? Where's the space to actually in community talk and engage and practice these types of things? And I think that's where the church can learn a ton from jiu-jitsu. Now it's interesting, one of the clear things that our listeners are going to hear, and maybe they haven't heard me talk about jiu-jitsu very much. I'm just actually coming back after a hiatus from COVID, and I had 2 kids. And so I was that blue belt JM that just disappeared. Yeah. And so I'm coming back.
The stereotypical blue belt.
Yeah. Stereotypical blue belt. You get your first belt and you're never to be seen. Right. So, but one of the things my listeners are probably picking up, they're like, wow, Jordan's really passionate about this. And one thing I've noticed about people who practice jujitsu is you don't need to ask them if they do it, because they just tell you they do it, because it makes such a significant difference in their life. The information, the practice of it in community makes such a transformation in their life. They just can't help but to tell people about it. And sometimes I wonder, as Christians, if the information that we're giving people and, maybe the lack of practice in community is not getting the fruit that they're hoping for. And so that's why we have a discipleship or evangelism crisis, why people are not really excited about sharing the gospel a lot of times. Not everyone, but some guys struggle here. It's because the question is, has it made the difference in their life that just it kind of bleeds out of them?
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu does that.
Yeah.
But a lot of men are
100%.
struggling to say, oh, you're telling me to go evangelize, but like it just feels like information. It hasn't
Yeah.
made the difference in my life. And so I don't know. What do you think about that?
I'm going to say something a little controversial. I don't think
Give
you
her.
should evangelize if Jesus has not radically changed your life.
Yeah.
If you are not speaking from personal experience, I think your evangelism. Let me say, God can use a talking donkey. He can use
Of
anything.
course.
But
Yeah.
if you, the reason that somebody's passionate and they tell people like jujitsu, CrossFit, the jokes are the same. You know, you don't have to tell. The first rule of CrossFit is always talk about CrossFit, and first rule of jujitsu is always talk about jujitsu, and it's
Yeah.
true. But it's because jujitsu really does change people's lives. And so it's not like they set out to have, that's the thing. You don't have to tell people, go tell your neighbors about jujitsu. You never have to tell anybody that. All you have to do is say, get excited, keep coming to class, keep training. The neighbors will find out about jujitsu. So
Yeah.
why don't we do that with the gospel? If somebody is saying, well, I'm just struggling with evangelism, my question would not be, well, let's work on your tactics on how to present, or here's some apologetics arguments. My first thing is going to be, okay, do you really believe this? Like, do you really believe the message of the gospel? Tell me what you think the gospel is first, because I want to make sure you are not thinking that it's just, oh, well, this is how we die and go to heaven rather than hell. Okay, that's not the gospel. So
Yeah.
let's back up and let's give you the gospel in its full Genesis to Revelation meta narrative glory. And if that doesn't excite you, then of course I'm not going to tell you to go out and tell other people about it yet, because you haven't learned the lesson. And
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
so that's the kind of I see that difference between discipleship and not, making notches on your belt, getting
Yeah.
proselytizing.
Exactly.
The difference between
Yeah.
discipleship and proselytizing: one is trying to increase numbers, one is pursuing authentic faith that naturally comes out in everything you do.
Mhm. Yeah, and so the question for listeners today is: has Jesus made a difference in your life? Like,
Yeah.
has for the guys that are listening, like, can you truly say that Jesus has transformed your life? And I'm not just talking about like crazy testimonies, but
Right.
do you see things differently? Do you have a different hope, a different future? Or is your hope not in your job and your finances? Are you looking forward to, following Jesus and being with him, and
Yeah.
not just this destination after death, but like this idea of the kingdom of God and heaven being here and now, and
Yeah.
and the life and life abundant that's available to you. And
Yeah.
so my encouragement to guys that are listening, man, would be to say, find somewhere a space, a group of men that are willing to kind of do hard things together, to iron sharp. I've heard this all the time. Almost every men's group in Canada is called Iron Sharpens Iron, but that
Right.
requires, like jujitsu, actually friction, actually working and doing something hard together, practicing, going out there, trying, And so my encouragement to men is like, actually find those guys, that community. It exists. It's just a matter of maybe beginning it or starting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to encourage people too. Um, when I'm talking about has Jesus changed your life, sometimes that gets misconstrued, especially among men, with do you feel a certain way about the
Yeah,
gospel?
exactly.
And I
Yeah.
want to be aware of that, because I think that's
Yeah.
a pitfall. Most of the time, my faith is not a feelings based
Yeah.
thing. Like, I'm not someone who gets excited about talking about spiritual things, and some guys that just get fired up,
Yeah.
brother, let me tell you, oh, I was in the word and it was just that's typically not me. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not against it, and
Yeah.
I just, that's more of a personality type than anything.
Yeah.
But for me, a better mark of has Jesus changed your life is, how do you view the world? What do
Yeah.
you think
Exactly.
is the ultimate truth and ultimate priorities? Not whether you
Yeah.
have all the answers, not whether thinking about Jesus gives you warm fuzzies or fires you up. I hate when people compare church to sporting events, like, oh, you can get this excited about the Super Bowl. Why can't you get this excited at church on Sunday? Well,
Yeah.
like, because the outcome of the church on Sunday is not in question. The outcome of a sporting event is in question. And so there
Wow.
are two different things. I don't like that. I don't want anybody to hear me
Yeah.
pushing anything in that direction, but rather, if your life has been transformed by something, it will have
Yeah.
evidence in how you live.
Yeah.
And your personality style will determine your evangelism style.
Yeah. That's
But
so true.
have you been transformed? Do you see the world differently? Are you walking in the daylight, or are you still asleep in the darkness? That's what we see in the New Testament, I think, when we look at gospel transformation and discipleship.
Man, no, that is, JM, that is so helpful. I feel like I could actually talk to you all day about all these things. And so we may have to circle back another time, but more about Disciple Dojo. And I love your heart for what you're doing, man. Let people know where they can find you.
Best place to connect is on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and just put Disciple Dojo, all one word, DISCIPLE DOJO. That's where I do not daily, but multiple times a week videos. Everything from reviews of study Bibles and theological concepts to interviews with biblical scholars. I do deep dive teaching through books of the Bible. We've done Genesis through Ruth. Those are available in the playlist. I'm currently teaching through the Psalms, and we just put the Hebrew text on the screen, put the English beside it, go verse by verse. Very
Cool.
nerdy, Bible nerdy stuff. We have a fun playlist called Superhero Seminary. I'm surrounded by action figures behind me because
Yeah, I see
I
that.
use 80s superheroes action figures to explain nerdy biblical concepts. So those
Cool.
are very fun, tongue-in-cheek kind of satire videos. But that's the bulk of what Disciple Dojo is doing. If you're interested in knowing more about our refugee Jitsu program, we are full 501c3 nonprofit. We are entirely donor funded. So we're always in need of support. Even if you don't care about jiu-jitsu, but you want to provide the opportunity for
Yeah.
refugee, immigrant, or just local lower income kids who need the benefits of jiu-jitsu but may not be able to get it, may not be able to afford it, we offer it completely free of charge. They don't even buy their gi; they have to earn their gi and their belt.
Cool.
But you can find out information at discipledojo.org. And there's
Super
links
cool.
at the top of the page that we have our biblical training, our curriculum, our small group stuff that we do, Bible nerd stuff. And then there's a martial arts link that has our refugee jitsu program. So that's the best way to reach. And if you're on Facebook and you're not married, join us at the grown-ups table. Just go to Facebook
Yeah.
groups and all one word, grown-ups table. And we'd love to connect with you
I
there.
love that, man. Super cool. And on your YouTube channel, you didn't mention it explicitly, but I do want to just point out your black belt Bible tips. And so that's super. Make sure you hit the playlist and you see the black belt Bible tips. And
Yeah, we walk through
gentlemen,
how to
listen,
read the Bible, tips on reading every book of the Bible from a
cool,
black belt Bible nerd. Check it out.
super cool. Yeah, well, JM, thanks again, man, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Let's do it. I had a great time, and I'm happy to chat anytime.
Awesome, thanks, JM.